Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the CCA CX10 True Wireless Earbuds. These are the higher end model from CCA. These are the 1DD 4BA model. I also have the CX4, which is just the 1DD 1BA version, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But today we're going to take a look at the CX10. And I do want to thank the Better Audio store on Amazon for shipping this out to me. If you look on Amazon US, it's $69.99, which I think is the standard price from everyone else on Amazon who's selling it. So again, I do want to thank the Better Audio store for being nice enough to send that out to me. So before we kind of get into the sound and some of the other issues, you know, it is a bit heartbreaking for me that they just didn't start out with the KZ-Z1, which is a TWS that I still use pretty much every weekend. I love it. I've talked about it a lot. Other people have talked to me about it. There's just kind of a small fan club of people who took a risk on the Z1 and really loved it, and I am one of them. And it is a bit heartbreaking. I just didn't start here and work their way towards this. Instead, this kind of feels like a totally different set of hardware, and it's kind of hard to rationalize. You have something that sounded really, really good, and then you sort of start it over again with something that's not quite as good. It was just perhaps an odd design choice. Perhaps it was, you know, driven by other factors. But for me, it is a kind of a heartbreaking one where I really wanted an improved Z1 and didn't quite get there. So first of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room. And for those of you whose English is not your primary language, elephant in the room is that glaring issue that no one wants to talk about because you're going to hurt someone's feelings. But you really can't talk about the Z1 or the CX10 without mentioning the battery life. For me, it drops about 40% an hour. So while the sheet may say it's about 4 hours, you're definitely looking closer to 2.5, depending on how loud you like to listen to your music. And what's more annoying about it is as it gets down to 30%-ish, you get a verbal warning saying low battery, and it keeps on repeating that over and over again. So every 20 seconds you're hearing low battery, and it gets kind of annoying. So you can't even run the battery down to 0%. So you're already on a limited battery life, and you still can't use what's remaining because of this verbal warning. So slightly annoying, and especially at $70, people buy a TWS expecting about 4 hours of runtime. I think that's about the standard. And at $70, you already went well up into over the budget TWS range. People have an expectation of a longer battery life, and the Z1, the CX10, neither of them really deliver on that 4 hours. So number two, try all the tips for fit and sound. So in the box, there's actually two different sets of tips. There's a normal small, medium, and large set, and then there's these kind of more bullet-shaped, a bit thicker versions. And these are the ones I stuck with, but you really need to find the ones that isolate the most sound from your ears and give you kind of the best bass response. And that's sort of the quickest way to figure out if you're getting an adequate fit, is to listen for the bass in songs, listen to them over and over with the different tips. And at some point you'll hit one where it seals enough in your ear and you get enough bass where it sounds right. Anything smaller for your ear and you're going to end up with a very thin sounding bass. So do check out the two bags. I think they were actually on the CX10. They are in two different bags. So these bullet shaped tips were actually in a different bag from the small, medium, and large set. So do try them all. I highly suggest running through all the tips to find the one that works best for you. So number three, so volume makes a big difference on this guy. The way it's tuned, it's a bit bright on one side and a bit low on the other side. So Sam Smith's Diamonds was one that I was running through. So listen to his voice, and at normal volumes, his voice will sound kind of normal, but the piano in the background is going to be a little low. The other notes in the background are going to be a bit low. So you'll raise the volume to hear the notes better, and then you'll find Sam Smith's voice getting higher and shifted. And there's this kind of very small range that's going to work for you. And you sort of have to play with that, of this balance of his voice sounding right and perhaps the other instruments in the background being a little low and rolled off versus raising it too high where it sounds a bit shouty and bright. So do play with that volume on your playlist as well. So the sound, I'll call it detailed, but it's still fun. It's got this kind of a fun, engaging V shape, but it definitely leans detailed, crisp, a little bright. It's not quite warm enough for me, but I think that was sort of an intentional tuning where, again, kind of this leanish midsection where they didn't want a whole lot of bass bleed. There is, but to sort of keep that clean, crisp is what kind of comes to mind when I was listening to music. So lo-fi, this kind of lo-fi indie music, so it plays well. You need, because of the mids, it has this V-shaped, almost a recession with a little bit of leanness to it. You really need some of these modern, close to the mic singers. So this song, Congregation by Low, Ocean Eyes by Billie Eilish, which is a more popular song. But when the singer is very close to the mic and there's kind of a sparse, minimal instruments around that voice, all that sounds really well on the CX10. That plays well with the soundstage that you get, and so those were generally the things that I was gravitating toward. Anything that was too complex, I wasn't a fan on the CX10, and we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. But those particular songs will kind of give you an idea of sort of the tempo, and there's actually quite a bit of bass in those songs too, so it's not like it's a bass light issue. It's just that it's more of a treble issue, which we'll get to. So the bass, so you have to have the right fit, and you'll end up with kind of a nice mid and sub bass. There's some rumble there, not as much as everyone's going to want, but with the right tips, it's actually not too bad. So I've called this binary problem. So if you have a bassy song, like a dancey pop song, you get a lot of bass, and it's quite nice, and you're never going to say, oh, I'm missing, I wish there was just a little more bass there. It's actually quite good on bassy songs. But when you don't have a bassy song and the bass is just kind of a complement to the other instruments, it's going to be low, and that's where some other people said it's bass light, and that's where you see that. So it has this almost this binariness to it where it's either a whole lot and it's full, or it feels a little minimal, a little light. And it's hard to find songs that, fit in between the two. It's either you're full on and bassy or a little bit light. But I do wish it sounded, the driver was the Z1 XUN, because it's really fine. And I wish every IM used that as well. So for the mids, the lower sounds good because you get some bass to it, and you get a bassy song with a little bleed. It sounds actually quite nice. It sounds a little warmer than I set up there, but it's still bright and crisp. But on the lower side, it actually sounds a little warmer. But as you move up, it ends up being thinner and brighter through the upper mids. So Hayley Williams, Simmer. So not exactly kind of a folksy song like that, but more of a modern. She's still a close to the mic singer. There's some really sharp drums going on in the background around your head. Really nice, but there's a nice backing bass to it. Her vocals are forward and detailed, the sharp drums. The instrument imaging is really sharp and forward. And again, it's kind of this less complex song, so there's not that many other instruments playing, and it sounds great. But other than her voice, and not overly bright at higher volumes. So it kind of goes back to this volume problem of it's a song where you don't have to necessarily pull the volume down to make her voice sound right. At your normal volume, it actually sounds pretty good. And even if you bump it up a little bit, the drums end up being a bit sharper, but her voice doesn't really shift out of place like Sam Smith's does. So the treble is kind of where the most problems were. It's extended, but it's got a really thin, tinny, artificial sound to it. And I don't say that all that often, but this one tended to bother me more than most. And so Motley Crue's Kickstart My Heart, classic 80s metal song. I kind of went over and over it because it just sounded so off. And I've never really heard it sound that off before. And to begin with, it's not like it's a super well-mastered song. Vince Neil's kind of shouty screaming powerful drums, screaming guitars. It's not a super critical song, but at the same time, you do expect the guitars to sound like guitars, the cymbals should resemble cymbals, and his voice shouldn't be pushed off in the background. So, yeah, I think there's just a lot of treble issues that it's really hard to get past and stop from hearing them over and over again. And again, that's kind of went out back to these kind of lower range songs, which don't have as, a constant cymbal or some other guitars or something else that was a reminder of what was happening on the treble side. So the soundstage is good to quite good. Occasionally it sounds really good. So with the right song, you do get this illusion that if you've never listened to a TWS, it's kind of a fascinating thing that happens is for a couple seconds, you'll forget that you have earbuds in your ears because you don't have the cable around your chin. You just kind of forget about it, and then you just notice that there's sound all around your head. And I call it the TWS illusion. And so it happens with this one as well. With the right song, something like Low or even Hayley Williams Simmer was actually a better example. The instruments are actually moving around your head, and you do end up with this nice illusion of forgetting about these, very lightweight earbuds in my ears and just hearing the sound. It's kind of a nice sensation when your brain goes there. So lastly, I do think that CCA did a design over sound quality. They had this idea in their mind of doing a 4BA hybrid, and they made that the primary goal instead of top-notch sound quality, which is kind of the simplicity of the Z1. We're just going to throw a dynamic driver and make it sound really good. This, I think they kind of listened to the marketing guys and said, well, there's no other real 1DD 4BA on the market. We can come in at a reasonable price. And I think that was a primary decision that I wouldn't say that was the right way to go with it, but that's what they did, and that's what we ended up with. So again, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.